There we go. And Steve, you've got full screen. All is good here. I'll leave
Okay.
you alone. Cheers.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Churchian, Chief Product Officer and Chief Information Security Officer at Xypro. And this is a topic that keeps coming up over and over and over, and we're going to hear about it more and more. And what is Zero Trust security? So before I talk about any products and solutions and things that I'm going to tell you that you're going to need in your environment, I wanted to introduce what Zero Trust is, so everybody has a level foundation to understand what we're going to build on top of. Now, a little bit about Xypro. Most of you are already familiar with us. We've been in the mission critical cybersecurity space for about 40 years. We're headquartered in Southern California, but we've had a very, very strong relationship with HPE going back decades. In fact, our entire product portfolio is now offered through HPE. And that partnerships keeps getting stronger and stronger. As well as recently, we've introduced some new partnerships into the market, bringing even further integration advantages to nonstop customers. And that's what companies like SailPoint and CyberArk and ServiceNow, and we do have a few others in the mix that we'll be announcing here in the next few months. And then we'll round out this presentation talking about security intelligence and analytics and how that brings the entire picture together when it comes to Zero Trust security, and highlighting our patented security intelligence technology that enables nonstop to be able to stay proactive. Now, I love questions, I love interaction, so I can't see the chat box, but if there's any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. John will chime in, let me know there's a question, we'll pick it up and we'll have a discussion. Okay, so expanding a little bit more on Xypro. Our methodology here is focusing on integration, modernization, and innovation of the nonstop platform. And again, for decades, we've been the leader when it comes to these three key areas on nonstop in terms of security. And this is where we leverage a lot of our strategic technology partnerships to bring what's happening in the rest of the IT ecosystem into the nonstop world. As nonstop is getting more and more open and integrated, we need to be able to leverage the technologies that exist in our IT environment and have nonstop play a role in that instead of having fragmented or siloed solutions. So that's where our focus has been over the last few years. Now, Xypro in the market, we've got over 700 customers worldwide. And in fact, two of our products, which most of you are familiar with, come packaged with the operating system. That's Xygate User Authentication that enables you to have multi-factor authentication for your nonstop without having to purchase anything. You've already got the capability for multi-factor authentication right out of the box. In fact, user authentication will also enable you to integrate with Active Directory. So again, that integration piece into the rest of the enterprise. That way your IDs can be federated and your directory, excuse me, your directory authentication service can now be controlled from Microsoft Active Directory. And Merged Audit comes out of the box on your system. All of you have it on your nonstop servers. Merged Audit will enable you to integrate your nonstop data with technologies like Splunk, Logarithm, QRadar, ELK, and more. Anything that can ingest syslog, SNMP, SMTP, as well as a REST API now will be able to leverage nonstop data to be able to integrate with those technologies. Now, Xypro is a global organization. We've got sales and support offices spread throughout the world. In fact, we're fluent in over 24 different languages. So when you call us for support, if you're more comfortable talking in a language other than English, we've likely got somebody on our staff that can help you out. And customers do enjoy taking advantage of that. That's there for your benefit. And we've built a solid brand. We've been around for decades, and this is what we have to offer to our customers. Now, jumping into what the current security landscape looks like. This is a never-ending struggle. We're all familiar with this, so I won't bore you too much with these numbers, but they're still very, very important to keep in our purview. So when we talk about 4% of users will click anything, we're being bombarded with phishing attempts through email, especially now when everybody's working from home and we're ordering, especially during the holiday season, we're ordering on Amazon, we're getting UPS packages and DHL and FedEx and all these different things, and all these Emails are coming through, some of them fake, most of them fake, some of them legit. But as we take a look at that entire process, there's that small cluster of users that have a tendency to just click on anything. And that's 4% is pretty significant, because think about it. Even if you get one person to click on a malicious email that installs a payload on their computer that now gives somebody remote access to your network, it's game over. But we're not talking about one user. We're talking about 4% of all users. In fact, 24% of most data breaches include somebody on the inside. And when I talk about malicious insider, that's somebody who's been trusted by your organization to have a certain role and a certain level of access, and they're misusing it for whatever reason. They're there, they exist. We deal with them quite often, more often than we would like, but it's not one of these things where you can say, that doesn't happen in my organization. Just be aware, they are there. And we're into 2021, going into 2022, and the average cost of a data breach is still $4 million. And that number is not decreasing. It's actually going up higher. I've seen industry reports released over the last few months where we've gone over the edge on 4 million. And this is on average. On the higher end of the spectrum, you've got organizations that are spending tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to recover from a data breach. And that's just not forensic activity or technical activity. I mean, think about the PR mess and the damage to your reputation and brand, and all of that factors in. So this is what we're trying to prevent. So when we talk about zero trust, I want to establish what the traditional security model is, what's gotten us to this point. And it's been more of a trust but verify, where as long as someone can present credentials to the front door, they have access to whatever they need. So as long as I've got a username and password, I can give you my username and password, you validate it. I can walk in through the front door because you have certified that those credential sets. Now I can have access to my applications, to my network, to my file shares, to whatever's on the network that I need to be able to do my job. The problem with that is it relies on a castle and moat model, meaning you're walking in through the front door once you say who are you say you are. That's dependent on a couple of assumptions. We're assuming that everything inside of the organization's network should be trusted. But that's dependent on those credentials being presented, not being compromised. You're getting presented a set of credentials. How do you verify that that user is who they say they are, that the proper user is using the proper credentials to come in through the door? And then once they're in through the door, how can we ensure that they're going to act responsibly and can be trusted with what they're supposed to do? Goes back to that malicious insider point I made earlier. Now, compromised and abused credentials are still the primary attack vector. We see article after article after article that usernames and passwords are on the dark web. And they are. I guarantee you, I can go onto the dark web right now and find my own credentials on there because of some website that was compromised years and years ago. The struggle becomes because these credentials exist on the dark web and other places on the internet, most users are not aware, so they never change their username and password. That username and password that they might be using for a hobby website that was compromised 2 years ago might be the same password that they're using for their banking and for their VPN, or some combination of it for their banking and for their VPN. This becomes a problem because once I buy that list, or once if I'm an attacker and I have access to that list, I can take those credentials and run a few permutations on them and quite quickly guess what the password can be, allowing me to walk in through the front door without the validation that the person using those credentials is who they say they are. So this is still a big problem, is proper credential management. Now, privileged access was supposed to solve the problem, or some of it at least, in terms of shared credentials, because you can only elevate permissions, or only certain users can do certain things, but they've got to authenticate themselves. But this became a problem when the perimeter got dissolved, and we're no longer using a centralized access control routine where you've got other technologies like IAM and IGA and all these things that come into play. And you don't have a centralized VPN or firewall that you're going through. So for an attacker, their objective is to get into your network first, is either walking through the front door because they've compromised credentials, or target somebody that through a phishing attack that they can install a malicious payload on their system, and now they have access to your network. But then the goal is to not be detected and elevate their permission, get into the next system and the next system and the one after that until they get to what they're targeting, which could be your data. So Zero Trust flips that entire model, the trust but verify model, on its head. And when I say it flips it on its head, it's never trust and always verify. And when I say always verify, is every activity, every connection attempt, every session that that user attempts to make is validated against a multitude of different variables. So Zero Trust was introduced about 12 years ago now by John Kindervag, who was a Forrester researcher. This eliminated the trust based on a network or a single user or permissions. It's a modernized approach to the layered security concept where you have multiple technologies working together, and if a user or an attacker gets through one layer, the layers below it will prevent any further penetration. It's a more intelligent approach to that, and we'll talk about what that means in a more intelligent approach. But we need to understand that our assets live on a variety of systems hosted on multiple providers. We no longer have a single file repository where all our critical data is. Our data spread across multiple systems, multiple applications, multiple vendors, multiple geos, data centers. All of this needs to come into play. So what Zero Trust would do, when I said it validates every single connection attempt, every time you try and access a file, every time you try and SSH to a new server, every time you try and browse into a subdirectory, a subvolume, that attempt needs to be validated. And what do we validate it on? Well, we validate it on identity provider, the device that's trying to make an attempt, the location that that device exists at, policies that we have in place, system and device integrity, the principle of least privilege, and then all of that needs to be coupled with auditing and reporting and continuous real-time monitoring. If you don't have the cameras looking on this activity, all of this is for waste. So Zero Trust is not a single technology. You've got vendors out there that say, we've got a Zero Trust solution. Well, it's not a single solution. It's actually a methodology or a strategy to ensure that you understand what are the assets that are trying to be protected, and then building the structure around that with technology, with process, with other methods to ensure that everything is validated every single time. So a question I quite often get asked is, how do we get started? How does this sounds great, this sounds awesome, but this is big, this is a big undertaking. Well, you start in chunks, and really the important part here is you've got to understand what assets you're trying to protect. You can't take a sledgehammer approach to this that might not require that big of a solution. So understand what your assets are, where they exist, and what the risk is to all of them. Once you have an inventory of everything you want to protect, then you can categorize them and say, these are the things I need to focus on first, these are secondary, these are tertiary, and so on and so forth. But the second quick win that everybody can do is vaulting your admin privileged and shared credentials. Again, password compromise is the biggest attack vector here in 2021 going into 2022 still. And this has been the case year after year after year. Why this is happening is passwords are not properly being managed. Having passwords in an Excel file on your desktop called password.xls is not password management. Vaulting them into an enterprise vault like CyberArk or another technology like CyberArk will ensure that your passwords are properly stored, rotated, and managed. Now, that should be the second step, is once you do your inventory, get your passwords all into your CyberArk vault. And what Xypro can help there is we've got an identity connector that we developed in conjunction with CyberArk. In fact, our connector to CyberArk's Enterprise Vault is the only CyberArk certified integration for Nonstop. So if you call CyberArk and say, how do I integrate Nonstop in CyberArk, they're going to point you over to Xypro and HPE. So our identity connector will ensure that those credentials, those Nonstop credentials that are vaulted within CyberArk are properly rotated, secured, and everything is captured regarding who's gaining access to it. Now, the third step is you've taken care of your password. Now it's your identities. What user accounts exist on what systems, and what permissions and entitlements do those identities have? Now, previous to this, we would manage those individually, where a system administrator would manage user IDs individually on every system and application that they're responsible for. And they might keep that in an Excel file or some other method to make sure that their heads aren't spinning every time they need to add a user, remove a user, or change permissions. That's not sustainable. That's why technologies like SailPoint exist, where in most enterprises, SailPoint is the single repository for all of your identities across your enterprise. That means a new user is added to your company. One of the very first things that's done is an identity is created in SailPoint. And then the manager or whoever's responsible for that user would go through and say, this user needs access to Active Directory, to Salesforce, to Workday, to Jira, to Bamboo, you name it. And those become options within SailPoint. And then they would check those boxes, and that user identity automatically provisions user IDs for those systems. They're all centrally managed through SailPoint. Nonstop was a manual process. What happened is we, a couple of years ago, in conjunction with SailPoint, developed a connector, a certified SailPoint connector between Nonstop and SailPoint, that now Nonstop becomes an option in SailPoint. So when a new user is added to your system, or to your company rather, the identity is created. You can now select Nonstop in SailPoint, and that user ID is automatically provisioned on the Nonstop server. So centralized management to ensure that you see exactly what systems every user or every identity has access to, and what are their permissions. That's critical for attestation and certification of users, which a lot of our customers have to do on a quarterly or every 6-month basis. All right, so you've got your inventory done, you've got your credentials vaulted, you've got your identities taken care of. The next quick win is applying multi-factor authentication. Again, every single one of you who have a Nonstop server have multi-factor authentication capabilities on your system. There's no reason not to turn this on in your corporate organization and in your personal lives as well. This is going to give you the best bang for your buck. So user authentication will ensure that you've got multi-factor authentication for your Nonstop servers, users, and now applications as well. So your base 24 application can also be protected with Xypro multi-factor authentication. All right, now there's a few other components that would play into this picture, but in the interest of time, I'll just quickly gloss over those. But is enforcing session auditing and monitoring. Now we've got all the controls in place. We need to make sure that we've got the eyes and ears on this activity to quickly be able to detect and respond when something goes awry. And this is things like SecurityOne for the Nonstop, which gives you real-time monitoring of all of these controls and gives you contextual alerts of what's happening in real time, so you can respond to the things that need attention and ignore the things that are benign. The key here is to understand that assets are going to live on a variety of systems. We've got data in the cloud, we've got data in public clouds, private clouds, across data centers, across multiple systems and providers. All of this needs to be factored in when we do our inventory. Are we on time? Okay, we got about 7 minutes, John.
Yeah, about 7. Yeah.
Okay, so what are the misconceptions and myths?
Yeah, we'll go easy, Steve, because you started late. Don't worry.
Okay, all right. You guys just tell me and bring the cane out and pull me off stage when you're ready.
Okay.
So what are the misconceptions when we talk about zero trust security? Oftentimes people think that they can go to a vendor and say, I want to purchase a zero trust a product. It's not the case. It's not a single technology. It's a methodology. So it means it's the technology, it's the process, and it's the strategy all coming together for this purpose. It's sometimes a shift in mindset to wrap your head around that, because we've been so used to the traditional model. But once you understand this in its basic form, it makes sense. And this is why, to be able to keep up with threats, this is the next step in cybersecurity protection. Now, the other one is we use multi-factor authentication, so we don't have to do any of this. MFA means that unless they can validate a second factor, they're not walking in through the front door. Okay, what about your malicious insiders that we talked about? Keep that in mind. You know, most companies say we're already doing this, or zero trust requires rip and replace. It's not the case. Yes, you are already doing some of this, but there's gaps in that process, and that's what zero trust is meant to address. And it's not rip and replace, it's actually augmentation of your current setup. It's identifying what those gaps are and saying, okay, now we need to bring in this technology or this solution or this strategy to cover those gaps. And it's not only for large organizations, is from the smallest, two-person shop to the largest organization can benefit from a zero trust security model. So ultimately, this will prevent lateral movement. That's what we're trying to do, is once your network is compromised, that attacker has nowhere to go. They can't SSH to another system, or they can't AFP to another system, or Samba to somewhere else. They're locked in because we're going to constantly validate every activity that they're trying to do based on those variables I mentioned earlier. This also forces you to have greater visibility across the enterprise. You can see all of your activity because you're actively monitoring it. And it doesn't matter if they're mobile, if they're remote, everybody falls into the same bucket. It also forces a lot of companies to accurately inventory their assets, which just blows my mind how much that isn't being done, is they don't know what data lives where and why. And it forces the concept of continuous compliance and ultimately simplifying your IT management and reducing cost. It eliminates a lot of manual activity in fragmented or siloed or individual solutions that do one thing, where you might have 10, 15, 20 of those, creating an IT sprawl. This type of strategy will simplify it and ensure that you've got the right things in the right places and they're all talking and working together. So earlier this year, Xypro and HPE expanded our partnership to offer a zero trust security model for the entire nonstop stack. And what that means is we've got all of the technology, and now through HPE, they've got all of the technology and the strategy and Xypro's knowledge to be able to evaluate your environment and put that strategy together to protect your stack from the network layer all the way down to your data, and wrap the whole thing up with real-time monitoring and intelligence. And how we do that is with SecurityOne. And SecurityOne is not a single product, like I mentioned. It's a suite. It's the entire Xygate suite of products all working together for a purpose. So SecurityOne's ultimate goal is to reduce mean time to detection. What that means is if something's going awry on your network, we're going to be able to detect and respond immediately. So how we focus on that is we're not just running a bunch of analytics and handing you a ton of data to say, make sense out of it. No, we're actually have contextualized intelligence in the product. And what contextualized means is we'll make sense out of the new data that's created by saying, because we understand your users, your network, your system, your applications, and a variety of other data inputs, we can say that this is critical activity that you need to pay attention to, or this is benign, you can ignore it, this is business as usual. Now that eliminates a lot of noise and allows you to focus on what's important. It is the next generation of not just nonstop cybersecurity. Cybersecurity gives you everything that you would expect, a unified dashboard, everything's in summary detail view where I can click on something at the highest level and drill down and get further and further detail. But at the highest level, I'm getting green, red, good, bad. Tell me if my systems are healthy or I need to pay attention to something. So we focus on intelligence and analytics, threat detection, compliance and risk management. We've got support for the HP hardening guide in terms of compliance, PCI DSS, GDPR, and we can add additional rule packs. If you've got certain compliance frameworks that you need to address, we can easily add rule packs. Now, another important feature of this that brings us all together is also file integrity monitoring. So SecurityOne is a modular platform, meaning you can license one or as many modules as you need. Now, the entire Suite Plus will give you access to every module that's in SecurityOne. The basic package is File Integrity Monitor. And again, just like I talked about multi-factor authentication, File Integrity Monitor is one of those things that give you the best bang for your buck. What SecurityOne does in terms of file integrity monitoring is it's all real time. We're not taking a snapshot. We're not periodically looking at subvolumes and then pulling data out. We're constantly have our eyes and ears on the system. So as soon as a change is made, a file is introduced, somebody modified something that they weren't supposed to, we're going to see it right away. We're going to report on it right away. And then you can take that data and integrate it with your SIM or your SOAR for it to take corrective countermeasures to be able to address that. We're not just looking at files. It supports Guardian OSS. It supports your users, your subsystems, your applications. We're looking at the entire system holistically. It's the most intelligent file integrity monitoring solution out there. So we're giving you everything in context. You're not just getting rows of data and then having to evaluate it. So any user or any system administrator who's may not be familiar with Nonstop, but still needs to manage security on the Nonstop can pick up SecurityOne and use it just like they would any other security platform. Now with SecurityOne, context is key. That's where our value add is being able to correlate data, meaning taking event A, event B, putting them together, and now creating new data out of it. And then applying a layer of context saying, this is important or this is benign, you can ignore it. That saves a ton of time because you don't have to go through Excel files or logs or other data manually to determine this is an anomaly on my system. I need to pay attention to this. The challenge with that is it's time consuming and it's after the fact. You're going backwards to investigate something that might have happened 5 days ago or a week ago. Whereas with SecurityOne, everything is in real time. And with our anomaly detection, what we're doing is applying it as a tiered approach. So the key here is to be able to ingest all of those data sources. So when we talk about zero trust security, all of those controls that I mentioned earlier are in place. They need to exist on your Nonstop. So with SecurityOne, you'll get all of those controls necessary to generate the data, not just put in the controls, but generate the data to be able to do this type of real-time analytics. So you have the controls, you have the data that's being generated from those controls, and with SecurityOne, you've got the visibility into what's happening in real time. The more data we can feed it, the more intelligent it becomes. So out of the box, SecurityOne comes with rules and signatures. So this is your traditional, this applies to every Nonstop environment. Take these rules and off you go. But then as a second layer, those rules are customizable. Some of those rules might not apply to your environment. Some of them might be maybe too noisy. So you can modify those rules to target, for example, certain users or groups or applications, or disable those rules altogether, or create new rules from existing events. And then the third layer is our machine learning algorithms. It's evaluating your system, your users, your processors, your applications, your network flow, a variety of other data inputs to determine what's normal in your environment. That way we can quickly identify what's not normal in your environment. So I know I only had 30 minutes. I think I'm about 28 seconds under the gun here. So I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon. If there's any questions, I would be more than happy to take them now, or you can follow up with myself. You can follow up with our account manager, Steve Roy, and we can expand on any one of these topics. We can give you a demo. We can give you a proof of value in your environment. We'd be happy to do so, or just chat and get your thoughts on where things are in your organization.
Thank you very much, Steve. Any questions for Steve? Always a shame to lose the opportunity to ask Steve some questions, I always think.
Okay, I'm always around. I know it's kind of getting late in the day, so people are probably thinking about beer o'clock, but feel free to reach out.
Okay, thank you very much.